So in this tutorial, we're going to have a little bit of a look at how we can go about putting a texture on a more complex object. So far, as we've been looking at materials, we looked at how we can put a basic material on an object. So for example, we might start off with a sphere or something like that. And we looked at right-clicking on it and popping down into assign new material. I might just see if I can pop that up a little bit higher. There we go, assign new material here for you. And then we could pop a shader on there. So we'll pop an Arnold shader on there, an AI standard surface, and then we've got a basic white shader on there. And if we wanted to, we also saw that we could apply a texture to that. So we could change the color of it, or we could actually click here and click on File and choose an image, and then we could choose an image like this one, probably not that one, probably more like this one, no, this one, okay, there we go, okay. And then what will happen is that that image will now be on that ball, and we can preview that by pressing the 6 key on our keyboard, and that then shows us that image on the ball. Now you can see here that that image has been wrapped onto the ball in a weird way. We've got a bit of distortion happening at the top here, and we've got a seam running down the edge here on the side of that particular image. So that's fine, and we can probably adjust the way that that's actually being wrapped onto there by changing some of the options in here. This kind of approach works obviously really well when you're dealing with a pretty simple object. So if we're dealing with a plane, like many of you did on your first assignment, then if we come in here and just like scale that up a bit, and then if I attached a new material to that one, and we made that one exactly the same as before, oops, wrong shader. Just fix that one up. Sorry for this stuffing around, guys. I'm working on a small screen, so the video quality isn't too low. So we'll assign a new material to that, and we will grab a standard surface there. And just like we did before, we'll click here on our file, and then load up our image, our concrete wall. Okay, and now you can see it there on the shader. So remember the 6 key on your keyboard, that'll show you a properly textured view of that surface. Okay, so that's nice and good, but what happens if we have a more complex object? So in your on the website, you'll find that we have a scene called t-shirt. So where is it? It should be here somewhere. T-shirt 2, open that up. And what this is gives you a mesh that looks like a t-shirt here, and you can see that this mesh is going to be a little bit more complicated. If we try and put a texture on this t-shirt, we're going to have a harder time of getting it to work. So let's try that. Let's select it and give it a new material, and we'll put again the standard surface on it. And we'll change the specular right down here because we don't want it to have any shine on it because it's a t-shirt, and we'll give it an image, and this time I'm going to give it a image of red hibiscus, right, this sort of Hawaiian shirt look. Press my 6 key and I can see that texture on there. Now you can see that the texture's been distorted, and that's because Maya doesn't really know how to translate the picture from here onto here. What it's done is it's tried to sort of project it onto the shirt, but you can see that it hasn't worked very well with these polygons here. It's smeared them out. Now we need a way of controlling how the pixels from the image are mapped to the polygons on the surface of this object. And the process of doing that is called UV editing. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into the UV editor view to see that. So we've been into animation before. Now we're going down to something here called UV editing. We pop into that, and you'll see your screen will change to something that looks a bit like this. Okay, so we've got our UV toolkit here. These are all buttons that we might want to press at some point in the future. And Then over here we've got our 3D object, so we can move and rotate around this like normal. We can select things, and you'll notice that when you select this t-shirt here, you'll be able to see the UVs. Now UVs as this mapping, so this is our mesh over here, all flattened out into 2 dimensions. Basically you can imagine that if we've grabbed this mesh, we've put it over here and we've squashed it down flat, that's what this is. And so what this is doing is it's mapping these different parts of the mesh back to this 2D space. And on that 2D space will be the image that we have created. So let me see here, I might just see if I can make this a little bit bigger so I can see some of these buttons here. Okay, so we've got these 2 buttons here. This one here will put like a default grid down over the top of everything, and this one here will turn on and off the preview of that image in here. If we turn off the grid, you'll be able to see the hibiscus image that we used before. Now one of the other things that's useful to see here is that if I come over here and go to face select, you'll see that as I move over here and select faces, you can see that it's also selecting faces over here. So basically this face here is this bit here. I'll just turn this off, you might be able to see it a bit better. Right, so when I come over here, go face select, you can see that when I hover over this face and highlight it here, you can see it highlights this face here. So these are the 2 same faces, it's just that this is the 2D version of it and this is the 3D version. So what we want is we want a better way of mapping this out here. So there's lots of different ways to do that, but probably the first thing we want to do is we want to have a look at some of the default projections here. So if we come along to create, you'll see that we can do this one here called planar, and what that will do is we need to select our object over here first. Alright, and we do planar, it'll basically flatten it out in a different way. We can see that's all flattened out there like this now. Still the same polygons that are there, and we've got more flowers kind of happening on the front, but you can see that it's kind of shrunk too much on the side here, and then it's distorted down the center there. So it's different, arguably better, but still not very good. We could do a cylindrical projection, so again over here, object mode, cylindrical, and then this will basically project it as it's a cylinder. Now a cylinder works pretty well for the main part of the body here, but you can see it doesn't work so well for the arms and so on. But we're getting something that you can start to sort of get a sense of how this is being mapped out. Anything that goes off the side, so we'll put our image back on, anything that goes off the side of the image, this image kind of imaginarily just kind of tiles into these blank spaces, and that's why they've still got bits and pieces on them. But you can see better now how that's mapping across. So what we want is more control over how we map this. One thing that's worth noting is that once you've got all this over here, we can use all of our normal keys, right? So I can select this and I can use my W key to move this around. And you can see that as I move it around, the texture over here moves as well. And I can use my E key to rotate this and my R key to scale it, right? So if I scale this, the picture of the flowers are going to get bigger. Okay, so I can do this kind of stuff to it as well. So we need a little bit more control here. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to turn off, no, I'm going to leave that on for now because it's probably good for us to see it over here. And I'm just going to make this a bit smaller. And what we're going to do here is we're going to try to manually create a UV map. Now in the old days what used to happen is you would select your object over here and you would do some sort of an unwrap over here, so you might end up with something like this, and then you would take this mess of polygons over here and you would go into vertex mode and you would select the individual vertices here, and using your W key you would just start to tease these out, right? And you would basically, it'd be like untangling fishing line or something like that. You'd have to come through here and you would have to go through and be clicking on each of these and just like trying to tease them all out into different parts and then eventually lay it out in a way that made sense. Nowadays there's much better tools for doing this. So what we can do is we can actually paint seams into our shirt. So imagine if we were working on this as a as a fashion designer, and this was an actual piece of clothing, you can't make a piece of clothing out of a piece of cloth shaped like this, because cloth comes out flat, right? Just like our picture does. And then what we do is we cut that piece of cloth and we sew the different cut out pieces together to create our 3D shape, which is our piece of clothing. So what we need to do here is create seams just like we would have in a real object. So we can do seams. If we go into the UV menu here, you'll see there's this 3D cut and sew tool. If you select that, you can come back over here and you can click and drag on here to paint in a seam. You see how that's gone like a white, bright white color there? That means we've added a seam there. And what we've said to Maya is that when you're unwrapping this, you're allowed to put a cut in that bit there. And we can add a few more of these seams around the place. So let's put one in here. And let's put one over here. And if you double click, it'll grab a line or an edge loop. And we'll put one in there too. So I've just put in a couple of cuts around there. Now it takes a little bit of time to get used to doing this, but basically you want to put the seams in places where you're not really going to see it, because this is where our fabric's going to be joined. So we're going to find that a flower that's kind of over here won't necessarily join up to another flower on this side over here. Okay, so we've got a few seams in there. So imagine what's going to happen now is that this is going to be cut along here and cut down there, and cut along here and cut down there. So basically this whole back bit can flap up and we can lie the whole thing flat. So let's have a look at how that works. To do that, what I do is I right click, go to component and select UV shell. Okay, and then I can select this whole thing and I can press my D key and it will unwrap it over here. And you can see it's unwrapped it all flat. So let's use our E key over here to rotate that round so it's sort of standing up like this, and our W key, and we'll just move it up a bit, and then we'll use our R key to just scale it down just a tiny bit, maybe a little bit more, up to you how much you want to scale it up or down. And you can see that now when we look at it, basically we've got this kind of pattern continuously going over here, and we don't have any stretching in the pattern anywhere either. The only problem areas are the bits where we've got seams, and here you can see that the turtle gets cut off and the flowers get cut off on this side. But because that's kind of on the back, it's probably not a big drama. And if we actually did this with a real shirt, unless we put a lot of time into trying to line the patterns up and cut it in just the right way, we'd probably have the same issue with a real shirt too, which is why patterns on shirts often have discontinuities in them. Now if we wanted to, we could work really hard here. We could even edit this image to line these things up a bit better, but basically this isn't too bad a job at the moment. Different kind of objects will need to be cut in different ways, but the idea is that you want to cut the object into different parts and flatten it out. Another way we could have done this object, and I'll just come back in here to I'll get rid of these cuts. So I'll go back into my UV cut and sew tool and hold down my control key to get rid of these cuts. I might need to go back into I might need to just get out of this for a moment. So I'll just exit the tool, and over here I'll just select this guy. I have to go back into object mode over here and then go back to the tool again. Okay, so now I will control click here and I will delete these edges, all these seams that I put in there, so there aren't any seams anymore. And now I'm going to put in some seams in a slightly different place. This time I'm going to put in a seam maybe running along the top here. Alright, so that'll cut the front and back of my shirt off, but it'll mean that the this bit round here stays the same. So we can sort of imagine that maybe that will work. And maybe what I could do here is just like put a cut on the arm. So I'm just double clicking because that quickly adds a kind of circle here. So now I've put a seam right around here. It means that, those whole arm bits are going to be cut off. And because there's a cut through here on them, it means that this will be able to be flattened out. So you can imagine that this is like a cylinder that will come off. And then we've got to cut down the side of the cylinder so we can lay the cylinder flat. Okay, now the rest of the shirt is still in one piece. So there's no easy way for that to be unwrapped. So let's just have a look at how this will unwrap. I might just turn off my image preview here, just so that we can see the unwrap a little bit better. So I'm just going to unhighlight that. And we'll come over here to Component UV Shell. We'll select this one, press the D key, this one, press the D key, and this one, and press the D key. Okay, and we'll just move this one out of the way. So this one here is the main part of my shirt. So it's all of the shirt minus the arms. And you can see straight away that this is kind of a bit more problematic. It's not worked quite as well because there's some level of distortion going on here in the shirt. So maybe I need to sort of like just, I don't know, scale this around a bit, maybe even rotate it a bit. And these two things here, these are our arms. So you can see as I click on them here, you can see the two arms. And their scale is like way too big for the rest of this scale here. So this wasn't a good way to cut it, but the main point about showing you this is that it gives me an opportunity to, because I've got complete cuts around the arms bits have come off separately. So I can actually texture these separately. Now this is really useful, doing things like this, breaking your object up, a single mesh up into smaller parts, can be really useful when you're texturing something like a car or something like that, because you'll want the tires and the different parts, like at the doors, for example, you might want as different mesh objects as far as the UV mapping is concerned, and this is a good way to do it. Remember, this is just an image over here that we've got, and this image that's over here, I'm just using a default kind of checkerboard pattern here so we can see how it's being distorted and so on and applied. We can actually export this out as an image with these outlines on it, and then we could draw over the top of it. So we could actually have a UV map that looks a bit different to that. If you go online and have a look at UV maps, you'll see that they come in all sorts of different shapes and sizes. That pretty much covers the main things that I wanted to show you about UV mapping. The best way for you to work on it is for you to play with your own things. Grab the t-shirt example that I've got here and have a go at using that, and the hibiscus image, which are both up on the website. And when you've had a bit of a play with that, maybe try UV mapping to your dog that you created in the earlier exercise.